Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so besides working with CRP, I also joined Melissa's 350 divestment team. And Melissa is from the Chicago area, the northwest suburbs. She has degrees in chemistry and natural resources and environmental science from U of I Urbana, which is pretty impressive, really. I didn't know she was a nerd, but I'm very impressed now. And she also attended climate reality training back in 2014. So way before probably some of us, certainly years before me, because I just did it last week. So deep and detailed credentials. So 350 Chicago was instrumental in getting the city of Chicago to pass a divestment ordinance. And her team is now working to pass a similar divestment legislation at the state level. So I see opportunities for Pam and I and anyone else in CRP who is interested in the divestment area to work along with Melissa and her team, perhaps attending her meetings and get involved in the divestment movement as a collaborative effort. So Pam, anything to add before we go to Melissa?
No, I think that hearing the work of 350 is going to be very useful, and I hope that a lot of us will join the movement for the state of Illinois.
Okay, Melissa, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for sharing your time with me this evening. It means a lot, and I see a lot of names that I recognize and they've come to 350 meetings to help us. We've collaborated on actions, spoken on panels together. So it's fun to see some of these names again. I have a presentation that I will be sharing. Okay. Hopefully that will go into presentation mode. Okay. Is that showing up okay for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will talk a little bit about how 350 Chicago is a grassroots movement to solve the climate crisis. And for those of you who are not already aware what our name means, 350 means a safe climate. So NASA climate scientists, specifically James Hansen, studied what carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere we need to be at to have a habitable planet, and that is 350 parts per million. And so since it's a number that can work in all different countries, because there are 350s throughout the globe in almost every country. So it's just an easy way for people to understand what 350 means. And now, as a lot of you are probably aware, we are over 400 parts per million. I can't remember the exact number, but we definitely have to reduce the carbon concentration in the atmosphere. So that's why 350 gets its name. We are solely focused on the climate crisis. So I can actually skip the introduction because Jeff did such a great job introducing me. This is from a campaign that we had in the city of Chicago, where we were asking people, we had kind of like an Instagram filter, and we were asking people to take pictures and post them online to get the city to divest and to take climate action. So people could write at the bottom why divestment is important, why climate action is important to them. So it's pretty fun action. So as I mentioned, what the name 350 means, but it was launched in 2008 by Bill McKibben and 7 students at Middlebury College. Bill McKibben was the first author to write a book on climate change for the general audience in the 80s. So each of the students took a continent and just said, we need to start a grassroots mobilization. And 350 focuses on building a future that's just, equitable, prosperous, and safe from the effects of climate change. So all local chapters start organically. There's a parent organization that is a nonprofit, 501c3. They also have a 504, which is like an action fund, so they can do more lobbying. But that 350 national campaign is, it's kind of the parent organization, and all other local chapters start organically. And those individual chapters can also become nonprofits. So I helped to co-found the 350 Chicago chapter in May of 2013. After I went at that time to the largest climate rally in US history, which was in Washington, DC in February of 2013. Some of you might have been there, but it was to reject the Keystone XL pipeline. And so everyone gathered in Washington, DC, demanded that President Obama not allow a permit for the Keystone pipeline. That campaign was successful, but I was so jazzed up after that I wanted to come back and join 350, and saw that there was not a Chicago one. So worked to form that with a lot of help from the national organization, which gives a lot of resources to local groups. Like, for example, they provide our website, they provide the platform for our website and Action Network, which some of you are familiar with. So our email list and planning actions. So we do get a lot of help from them. And then we became our own nonprofit, I think in October of 2021, maybe 2020, somewhere around then. And so Larry Coble, who some of you might know, is the president of the board. And then we have a few other board members as well. So we are actually now a nonprofit. So 350 uses online campaigns, grassroots organizing, and mass public actions. Those are the three main ways in which we organize. And 350 overall, 350 national, focuses on three different areas. One, a fast and just transition to renewable energy, 100% renewable energy. No new fossil fuel projects anywhere, as I mentioned, like rejecting the Keystone Pipeline, involved in Standing Rock for the Dakota Access Pipeline. So trying to have no new fossil fuel infrastructure. And then third is not a penny more for dirty energy. And this is really where 350 Chicago focuses its energy. So this is what the divestment campaign would fall under that. So we're really cutting off the social license and financing for fossil fuel companies. For 350 Chicago, these are three campaigns that we focus on: divestment, which I'll talk about tonight. We also work on Chicago policies. So there used to be the Ready for 100 coalition headed up by the Sierra Club. That project has since become defunct, but we were very instrumental and part of that coalition to come up with different policies for Chicago to take on climate action. I was personally part of the renewable energy working group. So what policies can the city of Chicago adopt to transition to renewable energy? So we shared all of those policies with the Ready for 100 collective. And then we also gave feedback on the 2022 climate action plan. And so right now we have created also a subgroup of people who are focusing on transportation. And so that will be part of the Clean Jobs Coalition created transportation subgroup. So we have members on our team who are passionate about that, and then we'll help influence like CTA electrification in that regard. And then we have the Stop the Money pipeline. So part of that is the fossil free Fed, which 350 led for a while and now has kind of changed plans from there. And we actually were able to hire our first paid organizer to help with the People versus Fossil Fuels campaign. So 350 National Council leads that campaign. And we were able to get a grant to hire Ebony Stevenson, who works on the campaign is to get President Biden to declare a climate emergency. And so there will be a big action in June. So we can definitely share more information about that. But kind of stopping the money pipeline, People versus Fossil Fuels, fossil free Fed, all of that's kind of lumped together for us. And Larry Coble in our group heads up that part of the campaign. So moving specifically into fossil fuel divestment. This campaign, I have a history on the next slide, but it's gained a lot of traction. And these are just some really, I think, instrumental images to show the power of the movement. People from Desmond Tutu to heads of the United Church of Christ. So really powerful spiritual leaders saying that, it's a moral action to focus on divesting from fossil fuels. And then, so it started a lot in faith-based organizations and college campuses, then transitioned into governmental organizations. And so New York was really the first city and state as well to really get behind fossil fuel divestment, which was a big boon to our campaign in Chicago. So a little bit of history of the movement. Bill McKibben launched his Do the Math tour. He actually came to Chicago. So that was in 2012. He presented here. But what the Do the Math tour is and what really launched that divestment campaign was, at the time, a UK financial firm released a document, a study that was saying that we can only burn 565 more gigatons. So this was 2012, so it's 10 years ago, but we could only burn 565 more gigatons of carbon to stay below 2 degrees of global warming. But fossil fuel companies had like 5 or 6 times that amount in their reserves that they planned to burn. So either fossil fuel companies would burn all of that, where we would reach 6 degrees of global warming, or 80% of known fossil fuel reserves would need to stay below ground to prevent catastrophic global warming. So just looking at that from a financial perspective, those would be, if we didn't burn them, they would become stranded assets. And so really fossil fuel companies are overvalued because those reserves are not actually something that they will be able to access if we want to prevent climate change. So this Do the Math tour, Bill McKibben went across the country to gear up support for the campaign, introduce the campaign, and then it really picked up on college campuses. So first college campuses started divesting, and that's when it moved into faith-based organizations and governments. And now there's all different foundations and institutions divesting. Even the Rockefeller Foundation has divested from fossil fuels. So some really symbolic organizations divesting from fossil fuels. And then in 2015, the Secretary General of the UN backed divestment. So there's a great quote from him out there that we sometimes use. And then, as I mentioned, in 2017, New York and New York City divest. And so at that point, we were still under the Rahm Emanuel administration, and we were talking to Kurt Summers, who was the treasurer, and he said he was on board for divestment, but really also wanted to push ESG. So you might hear ESG, it's environmental, social, good governance. So environmental obviously is like your climate emissions, your GHG emissions, what you're doing to prevent climate change, invest in renewable energy, for example. Social is where you're looking at human rights aspects, really, the people part of your investments. And then good governance is, for example, like how diverse is your board? What's the pay gap between genders? So that's really what good governance encompasses. So Kurt Summers was really about ESG, and he released there was a article that came out in the Wall Street Journal where he said he was more going to focus on ESG than divestment, which was news to us because behind closed doors, he told us he was going to divest and he was actually actively divesting. So that was kind of a weird situation. But then at the last minute, so in 2016, we had tried to get an ordinance passed that the treasurer introduced at the last minute, like in April before the next administration came on, and it didn't pass. So then basically when Lori Lightfoot took over, we had to start over basically. But we were able to get our resolution reintroduced. And at that point, Maria Hadden was the chief sponsor for our resolution. And before we had John Arena and Scott Wagusback as leading the charge under the Emanuel administration. And then Scott Wagusback became the financial chair for the city council. So that ended up working in our favor because our ordinance went through the finance committee. So we reintroduced under Maria Hadden, went through the finance committee with Scott Wagusback, and we had a lot of support from the treasurer. We worked very closely with the treasurer's office, and they said, we've been divesting. There was some continuity in staff members between Summers and Melissa Conyers-Irvin, who's the treasurer. And so they said, yeah, we'll do it. And actually they gave us higher than our ask. We were asking to divest from the top 200 oil, coal, and natural gas companies. So basically the divestment ask of the movement is to immediately freeze new investments, so no new fossil fuel investments, and then within 5 years unwind any current holdings, because we know there would be a loss if you just sold everything in one day. That's not the smart financial way to do things. So we would give people time and a goal for when to fully divest. And so Melissa Conyers Irvin, they had divested like $70 million, and I think we're down to just a fraction of a percent. And then they were going to divest from the top 225 oil, coal, and natural gas companies because they were using a filter from, I believe it's MSCI. So we were super excited. After 7 years, we were able to get the city to divest. So that was in March of 2022. There were great headlines. Larry Coble talked on a panel of Melissa Conyers Irvin, and she gave a great testimonial at the hearing to put up the ordinance for a vote. So because it's an ordinance, we've actually changed the law. Originally, they were looking at just doing a policy decision. So they would update their investment policy, but then any new treasurer could come in and just rewrite the policy. So we really wanted it to stick with an ordinance. So now it is law in Chicago that they cannot invest in fossil fuels. So we wanted to carry the momentum of that campaign into the Illinois state. And so I can give you some updates on where we are for the Illinois state campaign. So we wanted to carry over and actually taking a step back, when we first started our campaign in 2014, we wanted to divest the pension funds because that's really what the movement was doing, was looking at pension funds. And we realized that the city does not have legal jurisdiction over the pension funds for the state. So we could only go after the Chicago operational budget. So that's a good point of clarity, that the ordinance is over the Chicago's $8 billion operational budget. And now we come to the state to work on the pension funds, both the Chicago and Illinois pension funds. And the upper right is just a cool headline that we were able to get when we passed divestment. And then this is the current, I just updated this today. This is the value of the divestment movement. So this is not the amount of money that's been divested from fossil fuels, but it is the value of combined value of all the institutions that are divesting. And so there's 1,561 institutions that have committed to either full or partial divestment. Some just commit to partial divestment, such as coal. Just divesting from coal, which is a pretty easy sell at this point. And then others do a full divestment, which is oil, coal, and natural gas. And this is very hard to see, but it just shows this large piece of the pie. It's faith-based organizations, educational institutions. Those make up about 50% of the pie. And then philanthropic and government and pension funds are this other portion here. So that's where the majority of the institutions that have committed to divesting. So you might be wondering, how can divestment be effective? What are the arguments for divesting? And there's three main arguments for divesting. First is the moral aspect. As Bill McKibben likes to say, if it's wrong to wreck the planet, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. And so we really can no longer, in good faith, be investing in companies we know that are harming the planet and endangering civilization. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware that ExxonMobil has known about this for decades and has hidden the evidence, which is very unethical. And I know a lot of corporations do that, like the tobacco industry has done similar things. So we just really have to keep the ethical standards high and realize we can no longer profit from fossil fuels. Secondly, there's the political argument. Things have obviously gotten better since the movement started 11 years ago, with Biden passing the Inflation Reduction Act, Illinois passing the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. There has been movement legislatively, but for a long time and still today, the fossil fuel industry has had a stranglehold on our governments and not allowing climate action to pass legislatively. So this puts political pressure on our legislative officials to do something about climate change. And then lastly, what we really focus on when talking to state treasurer, city treasurer, is the financial argument. So divestment actually would defund the exploration, mining, extraction, and burning of fossil fuels. And we have a lot of great financial evidence to show that you actually would not lose money. You would perform at parity or better if your pension funds divested from fossil fuels. There's an organization called Corporate Knights that is doing really great work where they're actually looking at, they looked at Colorado, New York, and another state, I can't remember, but they looked at over the past 10 years, how much money a pension fund lost being invested in fossil fuels. And it was actually like $4,000 per pensioner. It was a very large sum. And so there is a lot of good financial arguments for divesting. So the divestment movement is working. It has had an impact on fossil fuel companies. Shell, Chevron, Peabody have all mentioned that they're having a harder time raising capital because of the divestment movement, which is great. So we're hitting them where it hurts. Bill McKibben was always saying we're going to go after their money because that's what's most important to them. So this has been effective in that regard. State pensions are divesting. Maine, New York have committed to divesting. So Maine did it through actual legislation. New York made a policy decision based on the state treasurer. And then California is still working on it, but they do have legislation, I believe, has been introduced. We looked at Maine and California to help craft the language for our bill, and I'll drop our bill in the chat momentarily. But yeah, so we have really been modeling this after states that have come before us. And then lastly, the divestment movement is signaling a new era. So it's really putting external pressures on the need to move to renewable energy. So actually, I'll just drop the bill in the chat really quick. Might be a good time to review a little bit what that's about. So we worked with something that's been great is we've worked with the Illinois Environmental Council. They've been instrumental in helping us. So Ariel Hampton is who we're working closely with. So we wrote our first draft, sent it to the IEC for them to review. They gave us some great feedback about what we should incorporate based on the pension code today and which sections of the pension code would need to be adjusted for us to achieve divestment. So they were great in helping us in that regard. And then also they sent it to the Illinois Legislative Review Board for us. So after we had a draft bill, had back and forth meetings with IEC to get it to a place where both organizations, 350 and IEC, were comfortable with it, then they submitted it Legislative Review Board for us. So what they do is really get it into the format that it needs to be introduced. And that has to happen by a certain deadline. So that was by December. And then we had to introduce the bill by February. So that's where we got, right here you can see Rep. Will Guzzardi. He's of the 39th District. He's a Democrat. He introduced this bill for us and the IEC really found him for us. So they've been super helpful in doing some serious heavy lifting. So we were grateful for that. And then we've been, and I'll get into this more with our strategy, but how we've gotten more co-sponsors and where we are today. So basically, you can find the bill here. It's been referred to the Rules Committee. So it didn't actually come out of committee. It was supposed to have come out of committee by March. So we do know that this will probably not move this year. It definitely won't move in this legislative session. Small chance it could in the veto session, but we're really planning for it being 2024 when it comes out of committee, comes to a vote. So we're using this time to really build awareness. But here we're saying, you know, as I mentioned before, no new investments in fossil fuels to divest over a 5-year period from the top 200. And the list that we often reference is the carbon underground. So it's also a fossil free index. So they're really tracking which are the top 200 companies based on amount of reserves that they have. And that list can fluctuate a little bit, but it's always gonna be the same companies with the most reserves. And so that's what they would use to screen out those investments. And then we have the pension funds named here. So the General Assembly, Chicago Police, fire, Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, Chicago laborers, state employees, state universities, teachers, judges. So that's just an example. And then we also said that we would like them to report their progress as well. So we would have an annual report issued reviewing its environmental, social, and governance investments so that we can hold them accountable and keep track. So does anyone have any questions so far? I know I'm sharing a lot of information quickly, so I just want to see if anyone had any questions. Okay, I can go back to presenting. So I wanted to share a little bit about our strategy. So we're kind of focusing on 3 different areas, and one is advocacy. So that's where we're spending a lot of our time right now, actually. And I can take a step back. So before we even started reaching out to legislative officials, we spent a good year just doing research. So we were like, what have other states done? As I mentioned, we got previous bills that we could look at to develop our bill. We did power mapping to understand who is in the legislature. We had a guy, Alex, in our group who is really good at ArcGIS. So it's the geographical information systems where you can actually overlay data on maps to really understand what you're dealing with. And so he created some really great maps where we overlaid all the different state representative districts, Senate districts, who was in support of CEJA within those districts, and then what score the Illinois Environmental Council had given them on their environmental scorecard. So, you know, some people could have 100%, like they voted in favor of all environmental legislation. Some might have 50%, they only voted for it half the time. So we overlaid all of that to really zero in on who would be our most the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to help support us. So we did a lot of research and documentation creation. We created a 15 slide deck that we give whenever we're meeting with legislative officials. So we just put a lot of effort into getting our story straight, creating documentation, power mapping, and that stuff still continues today, but that's what we've done for the last year until we really geared up into the advocacy last year. So what we're doing in advocacy is requesting meetings with legislative officials. We've also met with the state treasurer's office twice already, but that was with a gentleman who's no longer with the office. So now we're meeting actually tomorrow at noon with the chief investment officer, Joe Aguilar. So we're going to meet with him. He said that he does remember the meetings we had with Max in the office previously. So it'll be good to see what information has carried over with his departure. So yeah, meeting with what we're really calling advocacy is with like the state government officials. We're also doing action planning. So in the past, when we had our Chicago divestment campaign, we would do power hours, we were calling them. So people would come together for an hour and just really work together. So we'd teach people how to write letters to the editor, or give them talking points and how they could write to their elected officials, or provide phone numbers if people wanted to leave voicemails. So we would use that time to write to as many legislative officials as possible, submit letters to the newspapers, and then after that hour, we'd come back together and digest what we did. So we're going to do another one for the state campaign. Now that we have our bill introduced, we can reference House Bill 3037. And then we want to do more action as well, like targeted actions, more getting into the streets and planning something. So that's not anything we've done yet, but we did a lot of that for Chicago, as I showed you the Instagram frame that we were using. So just trying to get more people, raise public awareness, get more people involved, ask them to call their legislators. Another thing we did is we hired a great cinematographer or filmmaker, if we want to call her, but she has filmed our actions in the past. So when we've had our global climate strikes, I saw Dana Kazan, we've worked with them on Fridays for the Future, planning global climate strikes, and Lynn has been the person who's been filming that for us and creating videos afterwards. So we hired her at like a very great price to create a 3-minute video for us. And I can pull that up and play it at the end, but it was great because it just is a call to action for people. It lets them know about the movement. It's emotional because I always feel like 350 National has really great emotional videos that motivate people to action. So I wanted to create that same effect. And so then at the end, it's a call to action of calling your legislator for fossil fuel divestment. So just trying to engage the community in that way. And then lastly is outreach. So we're really focusing on how can we not just work with the community, but also with pensioners. So we've sent out emails asking people if they'd be willing to provide, if they are a pensioner, willing to provide some information, such as what pension fund, would you be willing to meet with legislative officials? Would you endorse our campaign? And so we have a list of pensioners that we want to reach out to help get involved, especially when we're talking to pension boards. So we're gearing up have a list of pensioners because we also want to talk to pension boards in case we can't get things through the state legislature, we want to try to get pension boards to change their policies, which isn't as concrete, but still impactful. So we have a presentation made that we would give to pension board members, and we've been collecting who those people are, and we want to reach out to them. Additionally, we just created like a 1-pager on why unions should care about divestment, especially because they are the future pensioners and they're paying into these pension funds. So you think they would be, concerned about how their money is being used. So we're going to start with SEIU. I've reached out to get a contact there, and just because we know they'll be friendly, they've come to global climate marches before. We've worked with them on city divestment, just to see if they'd be willing to support our campaign and how we can get other unions on board. So that's our strategy in a nutshell, pretty much focusing on these 3 areas. And there's a lot of work to do there. Also, to put things in perspective, I think there's about like 10 of us that come to the regular meetings. We meet every other Monday night. So we met this week, we're off next week, meet the following week, but we meet from 7:30 to 8:30. That's just where we can touch base, work on our strategy, give updates, but then there's obviously a lot of work that happens in between those meetings. Like, for example, we're meeting with the treasurer's office tomorrow. So there's a lot of work that goes on in between, but there's about 10 of us doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So we're a small but mighty team. And want to give a shout out to Jeff because he's been very instrumental in that. He kept saying my campaign, but it's his too. He's regularly shows up, puts in the work, so we're appreciative of that. Oops. Okay. I just want to give you a quick look at what the presentation looks like that we give to elected officials. So we have the case for divestment from fossil fuels, and it's really financially heavy, financially driven. We talk about who and why we're there. Like the main point we want to get across is that we're there for climate change. This is to have some type of climate action. A history of the divestment movement, similar to what I gave you. We talk about the energy landscape today to put things in perspective. So comparing things like cost of renewables compared to cost of fossil fuels and how they've dropped significantly. Then we talk about the financial evidence for divestment, like all of these different studies that have been done to show that you won't lose money, that the S&P 500 performs better when fossil fuels are removed. So we just have a lot of financial data graphs that we share with them. And then we go into common counter arguments. So 2 arguments you hear frequently against divestment. One is that managers financial managers want to uphold their fiduciary duty where they cannot do anything that's risky or will lose money for people holding funds. And so that's where we really show the evidence that fossil fuel investment is not a risky tactic for investing. And then another argument you hear frequently is that we want to hold on to our stocks so that we can participate in shareholder engagement. And that is actually something we've heard from the treasurer's office firsthand, that they think shareholder engagement is a better route to go than divestment. And so when we met with Max the second time last year in the state treasurer's office, I feel like he was coming around to our arguments about why divestment is a better way to go than shareholder engagement. And I'll just briefly share the 4 counter arguments we have is that 1, the SEC does not recognize any shareholder resolutions that affect the core business model. And basically what we need to do is stop burning fossil fuels, which is the core business model of a fossil fuel company. So one example, one analogy we like to give to kind of put things in perspective is that yeah, did someone have a question?
Oliver.
Okay, if you want to put forth a shareholder resolution to Nike to stop making shoes in sweatshops, that's something that can be put forward. If you want to put forward a shareholder resolution for Nike to stop making shoes altogether, that is not allowed by the SEC. So that just kind of puts into context what we're really asking for and what we need from fossil fuel companies. Another one is that we're running out of time. Perhaps shareholder engagement, it could have been a half measure we could have taken decades ago, but it's not enough for the urgency and the scale in which we need to act today. We need a transition to renewable energy. Another argument is that there hasn't really been any successful campaigns on shareholder engagement that we've seen that has really moved the needle. And that was where we got a little bit of pushback of saying that shareholder engagements are effective, but we really haven't seen anything that's been dramatically effective. And then lastly, we say, okay, if we really cannot convince you to divest, the minimum amount you need is $2,000 worth of stock to put forth a shareholder engagement. So they could do both tactics, divest, hold on to $2,000 worth of stocks, and then put forth a shareholder engagement. So those are just some of the types of things that we try to persuade, influence, and change minds around divestment when we hear counter arguments. And then we go through questions and next steps. So that's kind of what a quick 30-minute meeting, introductory meeting to our campaign looks like when we're meeting with legislative officials. I want to share a campaign status update. So as I mentioned, the bill was introduced in February. It's House Bill 3037. And then since we have met with different legislative officials, we've gotten Mason and Cassidy to sign on as well. And there are, I think we need no, I'm not going to say a number. I can't remember the exact number of people we need. I can't remember. I want to say 60, but I think it might be more of people that we need to support us in order for it to pass. And then these are other Chicago institutions that have already committed to divesting. So I think that's a very powerful thing to share when we meet with legislative officials. So the City of Chicago, the University of Illinois, Loyola University, the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, the Chicago Medical Society, and the Field Museum. The Field Museum was actually one of the first. We had an action outside of the Field Museum years ago, and the chief marketing officer showed up because he was so afraid of what kind of press they were going to get, and said, we're divesting. So that was pretty interesting. And this is a list of groups who support our campaign. So we have a endorsement form that we ask people to sign, and it's to the governor, the state treasurer, the legislators. And so once we get a lot of signatures here, we will share that with them. So we have individuals and organizations signing on. So thank you to Climate Reality Project, who was one of the first to sign on. So we really appreciate your support there. So yes, if anyone would like to join our campaign, I know Pam, I've seen you at meeting before. So you can become a coalition member. So as I mentioned, we have our Monday night meetings. As you already did, endorsing the campaign is another way that people can help us by signing on to our letter, and then reaching out to your legislator and asking them to support the bill. You can request a meeting with them. You can let us know if you're interested in requesting a meeting, and we can let you know if we already met with them or not. We've had maybe 10 meetings so far with different officials, and everyone has been receptive. We haven't gotten any stern opposition or pushback at this point. So I think once they see that more and more people sign on, we'll have a snowball effect in that way. But also, as I mentioned, we've gone after the low hanging fruit. So it'll be interesting when we start to meet with fence sitters, which is we met with the Rainforest Action Network, their advocacy lead there, to see if he had any suggestions for us. And he did really say, after you get the low hanging fruit, to reach out to what he called the fence sitters. So people who could be more easily swayed to go on with your campaign. So it'll be interesting once we start reaching out to those types of people, what our reception will be. But if you're interested in meeting with your legislator, please let me know. I can let you know if we already met with them or not. And then we could all meet together. So yeah, definitely stay in touch with us at 350 Chicago. Our email address is info@350chicago.org. And after this, I will drop my personal email address in the chat as well. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Meetup, and then we also have our website, 350chicago.org. I want to add to this, we also created a website just for the campaign. And that's where we're going to post our video as well if it's not already there. So as I pull up the video, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Melissa, I just have one, and that is, why do you think that this was sent to the Rules Committee and couldn't be introduced on the floor this year?
Yes, it was a very fast timeline. And I think we kind of anticipated that this was going to happen because we just got the bill into a good frame in December, and then it had to be introduced by February. So we were kind of scrambling to see who could introduce it. So we didn't have a lot of support, honestly, behind it yet. And so that's why we're glad it's introduced, because we can use this year to like raise awareness and get support. So we weren't really surprised that that happened. And then, yeah, we'll see if maybe it can go to a different committee once we have more support. Yes, John?
Yes, thanks. Have any of the pension fund managers presented counter argument, not just arguments, but numbers to your numbers for the financial case? And if they have, that showed that this would hurt their funds, how have you countered what they presented?
Yes, we actually haven't met with any pension boards yet. And so we haven't had that experience yet. But yeah, we do anticipate that if they, so one thing I will say in that regard is, in meeting with Rep. Gazzardi, he was saying that Illinois is uniquely situated as a state when it comes to talking about pension funds, because it's a very sensitive topic. He was saying that recently there was a poll done among different states about what is most important to the state. And in the research that this organization did, I don't remember who it was, but they were saying that Illinois was the only state that had financial health in the top 3 priorities. And so that just goes to show how much publicity pension funds get. And so we will have to be really careful about how we address that. And that is a watch out. And I think that's probably also why we're taking a little bit more time in approaching pension boards. Elliot.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So I was trained with Climate Reality in 2017. I'm actually one of the coordinating committee members for Third Act Illinois, which was just started in December. So our sister organization.
Exactly.
So my first question is, you are focusing heavily on the Illinois divestment campaign. Are you not focusing on any other kind of divestment or de-sponsor or defund activities within 350 Chicago at this point, because all your efforts towards that?
Correct. We haven't really gotten too involved, other than, as you know, we haven't gotten too involved in the banking divestment campaigns. I know that's one that's really heavy. The only way we really tangentially supported that is through our climate strikes. We'll have, we'll go to Chase Bank because there are other groups part of the planning that's their main campaign. So yeah, we've just been like supporting but not leading. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And the other question is, obviously you're partnering with Climate Reality Project, Third Act Illinois, very involved in divestment. and putting pressure on the banks. And I know Sierra Club locally has also done some things. How do you feel, is there an opportunity for all these groups to kind of work together on things so that we can kind of use our, instead of trying to do things separately, and instead of conquering and dividing, do it as a group so that we can, I could see, a few people from Third Act joining your group to be there every other week, or, some other, if we were to do some other action or other focus, because one of the things we're doing is trying to understand where to put our priorities right now, because we're a very young organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. I totally hear that. And we did actually put together a flyer that was like, join our coalition, and we sent it out to tons of environmental groups. But I think it's hard to get people to join your particular campaign when, as you mentioned, everyone has their own campaigns that they're working on. So I think it's tough to get people together. And historically, 350 has tried pretty hard to get groups to come together. We had years ago, like pre-COVID, some very successful coalition building meetings where we brought people together, and we actually had, I'm blanking on, ThoughtWorks was the name of the organization. I'm not even sure if they still exist, but they were a tech company that hosted a meeting that 350 put together where we invited tons of different environmental organizations. I think there were like 30 organizations represented, and we did asset mapping. So like, each group, who are you connected with? What are your campaigns? Is there any overlap? And we put together this beautiful map, and then like not much came from it. So I really feel like, in my personal opinion, it would take like a paid organizer who is kind of doesn't have a campaign of their own that can really facilitate bringing together groups and make a larger platform. And I feel like the Green New Deal Coalition's doing that really well. So Ricardo and our group sits on the Green New Deal Coalition, and that's a lot of different groups coming together to fight for a platform. So I think that's one way in which it's working really well. And then because Ricardo is linked there, that's how I got the SEIU contact. And I'm able to make connections to further our campaign through his work there. Yeah, I hear you. It's how do we all come together is a huge question. And I feel like it's been part of the environmental community for a long time.
I think it's easier on a national basis when something like Stop the Money Pipeline can be an alliance of, 200 groups, but on the local level, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Okay, I pulled up the video, so I would like to share that. Hopefully it's not too choppy. I know sometimes things can get a little choppy when you share them over the internet. So let me speak up and let me know if it's just poor quality.
When we're gone, we'd like to think that we left the earth better than we found it. We'd like to think that the next generation will be able to live a better, safer life. And that can be true, but we must act quickly. The world is accelerating toward complete climate chaos, and there's not much time for us to prevent the worst outcomes. Forests are on fire, the water is being poisoned, and people are being displaced. On top of this, the banks and institutions we rely on for our savings, our pensions, our livelihoods are financing the end of the planet's habitability.
We're going to build pipelines. You're not going to be able to do any more solar and wind unless we're absolutely doing more production with drilling and extraction.
If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage.
The history of systemic environmental injustice has essentially relegated certain communities to live in areas that are more environmentally dangerous, areas that lack greenery and areas that have a lot of pavement and asphalt and buildings that are reflecting the sunlight. These areas tend to heat up much more. For some people, those conditions become unlivable.
The silver lining, of course, is that people are fighting back.
Over the past 18 months as treasurer, I committed to divest in these type of companies that invest in fossil fuels, and to date, my office has divested more than $70 million through sales and maturities.
If we want the next generation to have a chance, then now's the time for drastic action. Now is the time to divest from fossil fuels.
The audio was perfect. You know,
Okay.
video was a little choppy, but it was good.
Thomas has faced a series
Oh,
of
sorry,
reports
my-
about his
sorry.
financial
It's still
arrangements in
playing
recent weeks.
something.
It started with a ProPublica investigation,
How do I-
which revealed that he did not disclose that for years he took.
Sorry about that. You were saying, Tom, it was okay?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, well, that was, I know I took a lot of time, but that's all I had for tonight. So yeah, happy to answer any other questions or yeah.
Any other
however-
questions? We have like 10 minutes, a little bit more. So we have time. Raise your hand.
Jeff?
Yeah, Melissa, if people on the call wanted to contact their state representative and senator, where could they get some material talking points to work from?
That's a great question. Let me drop my email in the chat. emmybrice@gmail.com. Email me if you're interested in doing that, and I can send talking points. And but Jeff, that's a good call. We should probably put something on our website for the campaign for people who want to contact people. Yeah, I can give you talking points for sure. And I can also let you know who we've met with already if you're interested in requesting a meeting with your legislator.
Mhm. That would be really helpful.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let me get the campaign website and drop it in.
And Melissa, at a minimum, I'm still thinking about Elliot's question about collaboration, which I think is the only way we'll get this done, because there's so few of us in each organization to make this happen, you know, and so the only way we're going to get it done is if we join forces. So at a minimum, I think keeping every time you have an action that you want your members to take, if you could also alert us in our communications team, which is Cynthia Linton and Jane Goldenberg, if you could alert us to what that is and what do you want our members to do or say or write or whatever, then at least we can get the word out to our chapter members. That worked really well for the electrifying public transit campaign that we've been running. We let other organizations know, and people showed up to testify before the CTA board or the PACE board or the RTA board.
Yeah.
It wasn't all people from Climate Reality.
Oh, that's
So,
excellent. Yeah.
you know, if we can alert each other in time, then I think we'd be likely to be able to mobilize people for certain actions that we need taken. And that's at least one way to collaborate. I don't know, Elliot, if you have other ideas, but that's at least a beginning.
You're
Oh,
on
you're
mute.
on mute.
John, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, judging from the two actions that I've been to, one in September, which was 350 Wisconsin, I think, sponsored in Chicago, and our action on 32123 for Third Act Illinois. There, you know, we had 105 or so people as our first action. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the support and the presence of people from all sorts of organizations. You know, there were probably 10 we called partners or sponsors. So just to be able to get the people there to have an impact is really important.
So, Melissa and Elliot, Cynthia puts out weekly alerts, okay? So if there was something important, we try to tell Cynthia, as Pam was saying. So if you have something you need people to click on to support or whatever, let us know. And, there's a good chance that we put that in the alert. And we have over 700 members. They're not all as engaged as Pam is and so forth, but a lot of them will, take action. So, by all means, let us know what we could do.
Yeah, and likewise, we have about 1,500 people on our email list, so we can definitely help publicize other
Good.
action campaigns related to climate as well. So yeah, I think that can work both ways.
Exactly. Yeah. And Elliot, you guys had that die-in down, at the Chase Tower, right? I mean, right? So
Yeah.
we participated with you on that, right?
Yeah, well, as I said, a lot of people participated in that, and we just became an official group in December. So to be able to, a lot of the third act groups were just becoming official groups in January and February. So we were scrambling, and again, obviously Bill McKibben is the one who's responsible for third act also. And so there was a lot of support that came down the last month, but there was a lot of scrambling and creative efforts that were done to get people there. So
Yeah, Elliot, do you know Babette Newberger?
yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah,
I've
she's part
been
of 350 as well.
Yeah, no, we had some people from 350 Chicago helping out. So
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, any other questions on this topic, or, the IRA or the training last week? We get probably another 10 minutes max, and then we'll have to close.
I just had one request, and that is, Jeff, I'm wondering if you could at least give people the 3-minute version of what you're working on for suing the industry.
Yeah.
Sure. I started this little group, divest, defund, desponsor, and I must say that it was only a few minutes ago that I saw that same phrase in Melissa's presentation. I did not copy that. However, what I did when I first joined CRP was to put together kind of like a list, just threw everything at the wall of things that actions, projects we might take up. And the one that got the biggest response was suing the city, having the city of Chicago sue fossil fuel companies for eventually for damages and for fraud and deception. So Pam and I have been working that issue, and we've had quite a bit of success so far. We talked to a number of alders. We got one of them, Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward, to introduce a resolution that we kind of put together by pulling pieces from many of the other localities across the country that are creating these suits, filing these actions. And there's over 20 now, states and cities and counties. So Andre introduced the resolution. It was assigned to the Committee on Health and Human Relations. We had 6 members of that committee out of 17 that were co-sponsors of the resolution. And then we got caught up in the election. So now I think similar to what happened to 350 and their state divestment bill, we're going to have to start, kind of from scratch when the new council is seated in mid-May. Good news is that there's also a new committee structure, and 2 of the current sponsors, Maria Haddon and Rosana Rodriguez Sanchez, are going to be heading up new council committees, one on the environment and one on health. So we've been talking to folks in Andre's and Maria Haddon's offices about perhaps scheduling some kind of joint hearings with those two committees when we reintroduce the resolution. So that's where we are now. We're kind of waiting for the next couple of weeks to see if we can reintroduce this and get moving again. In the meantime, Pam and I have been reaching out to various organizations in town, trying to line up expert speakers that we could call on if we have hearings. And Pam put together, kind of wrote for Andre an op-ed piece that they've submitted to the Tribune now under his name. So we're looking to start to gin up some publicity in that regard. And I contacted Sasha Ann Simons at WBEZ, who does Reset, to see if I could interest her in getting the alderman on her program, because he's already said he would do that. So that's the current status.
Julietta, go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, I posted it in the chat, but because I wasn't sure it was too big of a question. But yeah, I just did my third training, and it was on the IRA and the DIL, and the data we were presented was pretty striking in the sense that, you know, renewables are really, you know, going way ahead, and the funding and the grants and the provisions that these new laws are offering are massive, you know, not only in terms of how fast is going to happen in the next couple of years, but, you know, the fact that we are wasting half of the energy that we produce with fossil fuels. So in reality, we need like half of what we're using if we make it with renewables. So, you know, I was taken by this. I refused to be in any pension fund years ago because, you know, it was all junk food and fossil fuels. So I haven't been part of that. But I wonder these companies that at the time were very reticent to answer questions that dealt with ethics, how much they're just naturally going to move to renewables just because fossil fuels are going to go away.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with money, though. And I think this discussion tonight was important about money. And, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but for example, you put $5 worth of gas in your car, only $1 is going to move the wheels. The other $4 completely waste. And then you can look at, you know, energy generation and any number of things. And it's the same thing over and over again. Very inefficient, very dirty, and very expensive, actually.
No, my friend who's a physicist calculated for his class that just making electricity with fossil fuels and feeding cars, electric cars, was much cheaper than putting the fuel in the car. This is like many years ago. So now it's even worse than that. Anyway, sorry to go astray on this.
That's okay. We're just about out of time, and I just want to mention one thing. So number one, I'm going to get the chat out to you as long as your email, as long as you're already on the invite list or your name is in email address is in the chat. I'll get the chat out to you. I'll get a link to the video in a day or so once I get that on YouTube. And I'll also get the slides out. Melissa, I assume you can get me a PDF of the slides?
I can do that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll get those out to you also. You have them, they're really good slides. Just about out of time. Any just last minute thing? Question or anything?
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. It's been lovely being with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great job, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.